Today, our hosts and their guests consider the moment that we find ourselves in American history. Basic freedoms, long since assumed as givens, are suddenly under assault.
It is incumbent on the President and Congress to reopen the government as soon as possible and commit to preventing Americans from having to pay too much for health insurance next year. The only way forward is to negotiate a compromise. It's time to start talking. How lost is that? What century are they in? What fantasy world do they live in that would allow them to type those sentences? They could have written that line in any editorial about any government shutdown during any other presidency. But when you read it now, you see how lost the Times is. It's time to start talking to a man who refuses to talk to you and only posts social media video lying about you and ridiculing you. Talk to him. No one in the history of governing in the United States of America has ever had to talk to a person that crazy about anything, ever. And the Times says it's time to start talking. The entire editorial does not find the space to make a single reference to the madness of Donald Trump as even a factor in the government shutdown or in the way out of the government shutdown. And here, I guess, is its reference to Donald Trump's insane social media posting. Quote, he mixed bombastic social media blasts and threats to fire thousands of federal workers if Democrats did not provide the votes for his plan to keep the government open. Bombastic social media blasts. That's what they are. How very polite. No, they're not bombastic. They are insane.
You know, it seems to me we need to talk about these things in moral terms. You know, just where's the basic human decency, right? Who does these kinds of things?
I said that, Stephen, on Hour 1 today about is this where we are? We're debating whether to let people bleed out in emergency rooms again?
Right, and that's the thing. I think that our fellow Americans, sometimes, the intellectual side of a legal argument or their position on this or that political point of view, those things are important and policies are important. All of that is true. But I think we're really at a point where we have to be asking, the moral question, what kind of country are we? What kind of humans are we? Do we want to have these monsters deciding our fate and our future?
Yeah, but they really are. I was thinking that. They're just monsters, all of them. I'm sorry, Stephen Miller, you wrote a new piece this morning. Stephen Miller and Donald Trump want war. You just said they're ignoring a judge's ruling, ignoring the sovereign right of governors to keep their states safe, ignoring the on-the-ground facts to justify their dangerous invasions. You just said Stephen Miller's very mad. How dare a federal judge question the total power of Trump to make up facts, insist violence is out of control, and then declare an emergency so he can send in federal troops to clean up his fantasized anarchy. Legal insurrection, Trump's foaming at the mouth propagandist pronounced over the weekend. I mean, and Stephen, as you know, a judge's home was firebombed shortly after, Stephen Miller's remarks, right?
I was planning to write something really short for this morning, and with all the defying of court orders and the rest of it, it was getting longer and longer. But there's no question when you have Stephen Miller inciting violence essentially against judges. We don't know yet what exactly happened with this firebombing. It was an explosion of that house and of a judge in South Carolina. We don't know the details, so we need to be hesitant in making judgments. But this is a climate that they're creating, and we have to worry about it.
Yeah. This rhetoric, he called on the full power of the federal government to dismantle, quote unquote, left-wing terrorism, saying it's the only remedy for what ails the U.S. He said the issue before us is now very simple and clear. There's a large and growing movement of left-wing terrorism in this country. It's well organized and funded. It's shielded by far-left Democrat judges, prosecutors, and attorneys general. The only remedy is to use legitimate state power to dismantle terrorism and terror networks. He talked about, protests against ICE as domestic terrorism and seditious insurrection. I mean, these are the same people that defended January 6th, right?
Right. One is something we should worry about. They not only defended it, but but you have this guy pardoning 1,500 of these individuals who were criminally convicted.
Yeah. J.B. Pritzker said, he said this morning the Trump administration's Department of War gave me an ultimatum: call up your troops or we will. It's absolutely outrageous and un-American to demand a governor send military troops within our own borders and against our will. So, we've won for now, right? This is a Trump-appointed judge that now twice has told him, no, you can't do this, right?
And she has specifically, last night in a hearing, a ruling that came at midnight, New York time. I mean, that ruling, she specifically said, and she seemed angry. I mean, that he has directly contravened, her order. This is where we are. I mean, I think we should expect the kind of defiance of a court order, using Texas National Guard troops and to send them to Chicago or to send them to Portland with the idea that somehow the direction that the country ought to be taking for a manufactured crisis. I mean, he's been jonesing for this for years. He's been jonesing to involve the U.S. military, right back to 2020 at the time of the protest in Lafayette Square. Mark Esper, then the Secretary of Defense, said then, no, we're not going to shoot protesters in an American park. But he's been looking for ways to make this happen, and I think I don't like to escalate, and I don't like to scare people. I don't like to alarm people too much, but I think we're in a perilous moment, and I think we have to look very clearly at governors, Democratic governors, not only what they say, but what they do. And we have to look at judges and see how vigorously they're willing to defend our Constitution and stand up against this, authoritarian overreach.
You wrote a piece about another Republican-appointed judge 11 billion crimes ago, which was yesterday. You wrote, you said, reflecting on the wisdom of a Reagan-appointed district judge who stands up for the First Amendment rights of non-citizens that this regime is seeking to deport. You just said the authoritarian Trump regime is working aggressively to silence any and all Americans and non-citizens who disagree with them. This is not American. The loss of our First Amendment will represent the end of our most fundamental democratic right. This cannot stand. Again, this is just yesterday. Now it's like, this morning already. I mean, so it feels like some little guardrails might be holding, but they're pretty rickety, and then we always have to wonder what happens at the Supreme Court, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, you could at least count on the first administration. There was a version of guardrails because he had something of a leadership team that would say no to him, that would at least say maybe there's another way to do this. That's all gone. It's now, sycophants and miscreants who are just telling him, whatever you say, whatever you want, that's what we'll do.
Well,